Good morning, everyone. I am DEENA, and I am delighted to introduce this panel, this historic panel. It is the first time the three of us have been on stage together, and I have with us not only two incredible healthcare founders who happen to have built category-leading businesses in their own right. They are also unicorn founders, and they are also in the Lux Capital portfolio. So I don't think I've ever been more excited to moderate a conversation. Thank you both for joining us today. I won't go through all their bios because you just heard a few lines, and it would take the entire panel to talk about what they've done even prior to starting their companies. But we're going to have a conversation today that touches on a number of different facets about venture capital funding toward women founders, about women's and family health, about the real challenges that it took to get to this scale, and we're just getting started in both cases. And we'll have some questions as well from the audience. So I'd like to start by asking each of the founders here today to just share a little bit about the early founding days of the company and the evolution that got to where we are today. I'll start with you, Kate.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. And my son, Theo, is right there. So hi, Theo.
Hi, Theo.
So I started Maven 8 years ago, and Maven really revolves around access. And I think that it's not lost on me, and I just want to, say this up front, that we are, in a state where women's and family health, particularly women's health and family health, is really being challenged by restrictions to access and care. And so, I think Maven follows the medical community. We've always done that, and really, when you restrict access, it's harmful to patients, and healthcare should be about helping people. It's why we got into it. So, I think that really healthcare is about expanding access. That's the biggest challenge in the market today, and so I think it's really important that we talk about that. And I'm sure it's been talked a lot about on South by Southwest panels here. So way back in the day, 8 years ago, when you look at access, it means a lot of different things to us. It means access to care at the right time when you need it. So it could mean, middle of the night, questions for doctors, particularly for new moms, for parents. It could mean access to the right type of provider at the right time, and access to a provider who looks like you, who shares your lived experience. 40% of our providers in our virtual care network do identify as BIPOC. So that was always really important to us. And I think it also just fundamentally means access to the types of specialists that really serve unique needs. So whether, if you're a new mom and you need breastfeeding support, if, you are in a same-sex couple and you want to have a queer mental health provider to support you in your family building pathway, a lot of that access is what we found so lacking in the healthcare system. So way back in the early days, we had this bold ambition and this vision to really kind of build a new type of care model to really solve a lot of these issues. And so today, kind of fast forward 8 years, we have over 30 types of specialties. We work with big health plans, with big employers to transform, the care model in women's and family health, specifically around fertility, maternity, and early pediatrics.
Julia.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you here in my hometown of Austin, Texas. Delighted to be here. Just want to emphasize how special it is to have these incredible female leaders with DEENA and Kate here representing at South by, and happy to be back here in 2022. I have had the great fortune of building Everly Health here in Austin and started the company about 6.5 years ago, and really was started based off of my personal experience in having my symptoms ignored, paying thousands of dollars for standard lab testing that wasn't covered by my insurance plan, or was but then wasn't, or maybe went towards my deductible but then didn't. And then also never getting my results in a way that was meaningful to me. I had a pretty basic health issue, and it took me over 6 months and 7 doctors to go through this process just to get a basic hormonal imbalance diagnosed. And I share that because my experience came from being a woman in the healthcare system, and I quickly learned that actually was proven through research as being the common experience for women. And so when I started out building Everly Health, while now it is certainly a broad access care platform for testing, it really started with that consumer in mind, which was women that were underserved, didn't have access to testing, didn't have transportation, weren't able to get the care that they needed to be able to get the diagnosis that would then improve their health. And so that was really what fueled our mission, both in the early days and today, was to say, how can we create a different care delivery model? Kate is doing it in women's and family health and family building. We're really doing it in care delivery around diagnostic testing. That, I think, probably seems obvious in 2022. From 2015 until March of 2020, it was not. And it was a hard-fought battle to help explain to people that a diagnostic test is required for 70% of medical diagnoses. Screening tests are required for almost every American annually. Many of them have variable costs for the same test based on zip code, based on provider, based on insurance plan, and many of these disparities are very opaque and not well known. And so it was a hard-fought battle really for the first several years of Everly Health just to share the problem and educate people. And you could almost see this light bulb moment where people would say, wait a minute, I can do that? You won't ever send me a mystery bill? What else will I pay? That's all I'm going to pay, and I know up front. These are basics that we view as being essential for health equity that simply seem radical in healthcare. And so that's been what's fueled us these last few years to make sure that we can really make an impact in our particular vertical of care.
So when you hear us talk, you're going to hear a lot of words, but you're not going to hear one word, which is femtech. Please erase that word from your vocabulary. We are not fans of it, and it's because it really sort of relegates this idea of women's and family health to some niche, pink, frilly category, and we know that's not what it is. Not only are we representative of 50% of the population, which is a basic fact, but 80% of the decisions made in healthcare spending are made by women. We also know from an economic perspective that investing in maternal health, investing in long-term women's health, in pediatrics, has a direct impact on the economic health of a society. But there's some more data that we know. We know that women founders actually produce better outcomes. This should not be a surprise. It's documented in data. PitchBook, Bloomberg, numerous reports and research indices looking at the S&P. We know that they perform better in public markets, faster time to exit, higher revenues, better profitability, and yet companies started by all women founding teams received only 2% of venture capital dollars in 2021. 2%. That number went up to, I think, 15.6 if you added a male co-founder. It's pretty mind-boggling. And yet we're sitting here hearing from two role models to many early stage founders who are role models to me as well. And I want to just have some real talk for a minute with both of you. It wasn't that easy or easy at all. Can you share a little bit about what fundraising was like in those early days and how you think that might be different today for women starting companies in healthcare and beyond? Kate?
Sure. So we were talking about this yesterday, kind of some of the horror stories of the early years of our companies. As I think we were building both kind of formidable companies with great visions and missions and economic models that worked and getting good traction, and yet it was so hard to raise money. I mean, I think one of the things that DEENA was just mentioning is that, in an industry that's almost 20% of GDP, where women dominate, the decision-making by 80%, there is massive economic power in that audience. And I had all of that on a slide in my early pitch decks, and yet still there was a perception that women's and family health was a niche market. And I think that was largely because a lot of who I was pitching in the early days in 2014, 2015, 2016 were men. And so I think one of the biggest things that changed for us was, when more and more women entered the venture capital industry and became partners who could deploy capital into companies, it just got a little bit easier. So, our Series A was led by a woman, Lauren Bruggen. Our Series B was co-led by Jess Lee at Sequoia and Nancy Brown at Oak. Our Series D was co-led by DEENA. And so it really, I think, took a lot more female representation in venture capital to help us. I think obviously our businesses were good businesses as well. And so, we were starting to kind of show the product and the metrics for themselves. But really it was really important to get that diversity in venture capital, I think, to change the tides a little bit. And so I think it's something that all three of us are really passionate about bringing forward.
Yeah, I speak to so many women founders now who I think potentially look at the success stories and assume that it has always been that way from the early days. And so they worry that maybe this means that they shouldn't persist. And one of my core goals is just to share with them that it was exceedingly difficult to raise venture capital for my business and certainly for many others in the early days. And getting that first vote of institutional confidence was nearly impossible. And so I raised off of angels until we had a run rate that was almost in the double digits for millions of dollars. I could not raise institutional capital at valuations that were fractions of where I knew other founders that were male were getting term sheets. And I made the deals that I needed to make to keep the company going because I knew that I was building something that I hoped would be important to the world. And that is what fueled me. It doesn't mean, though, that I made the best deals, right? You could look at probably some of my earlier rounds and be like, ooh, those are pretty brutal. But that is often the choices, unfortunately, that solo female founding teams are faced with. And so it's about optimizing, looking at other strategies. You can't run a typical fundraising process usually as a solo female founder. You can't go to the top 20 firms for seed investing in your space and just run a tight process and get a bunch of term sheets and negotiate them. That is not how this world works for us. And I think it's really important to provide transparency and visibility to that there's not one way to build a successful venture-backed business. And if you're a founder that doesn't match the pattern, your pattern is going to look different. And you can still end up with a meaningful business that's really fulfilling its mission. And so that, I think, is a lot of what I faced early on. I often talk about the fact that you just need one yes, and you need that one partner. I shared a little bit of a story yesterday that I'll share here, and my husband is in the audience. I was out of capital before we were generating revenue, and I was being passed up by all the VCs. We were pre-revenue and about to go into a pilot. And my husband mentioned to a friend that he was having dinner with that I was raising money. That friend played a golf game with one of his LPs that was a doctor that mentioned that they knew somebody in diagnostics starting a company. That LP reached out to me, but there was a series of networked events that I was not involved in to even get that introduction. And that individual took 100% of my seed round in 30 minutes. And without that check, my business would not have existed. And he's ended up being a tremendous supporter and investor in diagnostics since then. I share that story because my success was still grounded in a male network making sure that I got a deal done, and much of my success has continued that way. I've had incredible male partnerships and VCs that have supported my company because it was a great business and because they saw the future in it, but I was very lucky in that way. And I share that because there's just so many different ways to do this, and I want to build the playbook of saying there's not one path. And that's a little bit about some of what I faced, a little different than Kate's, but some similar themes.
And what Julia and Kate will be too humble to mention is that by the time it came to their growth rounds, it was the investors who were vying to get in. And, it's really just an inspiring tale of perseverance, of grit, of resilience, and of all of the things that we seek out in our founders. So I want to turn the conversation to talking about healthcare for all. Health equity has become finally a popular term among both policymakers and clinicians. And both of your companies started off focused on this idea of the consumer initially, D2C, and yet now are providing care for employers, working with payers and Medicaid populations. How did you evolve as a company to be able to serve all with the mission that you have today? Kate?
I think, when one of the most important things I think is when you start as a healthcare company is you have this vision to make healthcare better, and it is a complicated industry full of misaligned incentives and red tape and regulation. I mean, it is hard and it takes a while, and so our approach has been always to just do it incrementally and to kind of stay laser focused on it's kind of like we always talk about it internally as peeling back the onion, that first population. What's the easiest population to kind of prove out your product? Well, for us, it was D2C. So we launched a consumer product, and we wanted to understand, and the thing that we were trying to understand was, does our product work? Is it valuable? Is it providing true value to consumers? Because if that works, then we have a business case to then go to kind of the next part of the journey, which was, okay, of all of the big payers in healthcare, what has the shortest sales cycles, and where are our incentives aligned? And so we found employers. And so employers, they want happy, healthy populations, and, they do still have painfully long sales cycles sometimes, but it is shorter than the government, and it is shorter than the payers and the health plans. So then we started to kind of bring our product into employers. And so, that really kind of unlocked the commercial population. And then I think within the employer market, we do serve a lot of different customers. We're not just kind of we're a New York company, not just kind of selling into Silicon Valley. Our first early customers were based in Texas, actually. One of our biggest early customers was Texas, Arkansas, North Carolina, Florida. And so we've been able to kind of, I think, sell as well into really diverse industries: retail, manufacturing, technology, banking, healthcare, and then a lot of the insights that we've gotten on those populations, which do kind of come from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, we were then able to take into the payer and to say, okay, this is the type of engagement that we see in, for instance, what would mirror a fully insured population or a Medicaid population. And so we were able to then kind of go there next. And so, I think particularly as COVID hit, and I think health equity has been just a theme, and particularly our category for a long time. We would always kind of say in the early days, we're gonna get there, but if we try to deploy our very limited resources there right now, then the whole thing could fail. And so I think it's just taken a ton of focus, and now we're finally at a point where we're really excited to be able to have the resources and the scale to really kind of tackle all at once. And as DEENA knows, we just launched our first Medicaid populations this year, and that's kind of the next market that we're really kind of doubling down on at the moment.
I mentioned price transparency has been a core value of ours since the beginning of founding Everly Health, and for us that was and remains a key way that we build health equity. We are one of the only companies that tells you upfront what you'll pay and you will never get a surprise bill. That also means we work on migrating all of our pricing downward, and we believe that there's a huge opportunity in providing accessible and affordable, ubiquitous diagnostics. That's a huge internal effort for us, and one that others have challenges competing with because of the incentives of insurance plans and how those can really create incentives that end up impacting your pocket as an American consumer when those bills aren't covered. What we have done to extend that mission is we launched into Medicare populations a number of years ago. I was on Shark Tank in 2017, and I'm going to bridge that to Medicare, which is I got a call from a Humana executive, one of the largest Medicare population plans in the country, that said, I think that your model can be essential for closing care gaps for our Medicare members. Since then, we've expanded to work with over 35 health plans. We are the vendor of choice for colon cancer screening, diabetes screening, kidney disease screening in the home, remotely, and using a digital platform for millions and millions of Medicare members. And now we are similarly moving into the Medicaid space. So as you think about how do you bridge this desire for transparency and affordability with then going into the same healthcare infrastructure that created some of those dynamics and problems in the first place, we've adhered to principles like we will not provide a test if it's not free, entirely free, paid by the health plan, or if they don't know up front 100% guaranteed what the price is going to be. So those are choices that we've made to make sure that we are still building that vision of health equity and accessibility and still being able to move into bigger populations that we couldn't just serve with our consumer model. And so it's a complicated dance, and it's one I think a lot of startups struggle with, is how do you move seamlessly into a unified vision for a company that is moving into multiple channels. And I think it can be done in healthcare, and I think it's super important to do so. Ignoring a direct-to-consumer business or ignoring an enterprise business simply means you're cutting off part of population access to your services. But it's certainly not easy, and it's something that takes time.
So we've made it a third of the way through a panel on healthcare without saying COVID or pandemic, but the time has come. All of us, the three of us, started working in and around digital health before it was cool, before there was really a clear venture outcome, before, well, we'll not talk about public markets right now, but before the tailwinds and virtual care becoming a necessity and not just a nice to have, before healthcare in the home was obvious. Tell us a little bit about how COVID transformed or didn't your business and what you see in terms of moving past the pandemic, how that will change or not. Kate.
Well, we are, telehealth is fundamentally what powers a lot of our virtual care. So it's probably pretty obvious, but we kind of woke up one day and, I think overnight, like 80% and then 90% and then 95% of care had shifted into virtual settings. And so for us, a few things happened. So number one, during those really kind of crazy months in the spring of 2020 when no one really knew what was going on, we just saw spikes across our platform, 300% spike in mental health. Fertility clinics were shut down, so we were kind of helping. Care navigation and navigators are a central component of our care model, and so we were helping try to rebook people into certain clinics and travel. And there was, if you remember, during labor and delivery, a lot of pregnant patients weren't able to bring their partners in, and so there was a lot of fear and anxiety. So that was for us, we were what was very cool was that all of our providers in our network kind of stood up. They set more availability than they've ever set to meet the demand, and we were able to kind of really show the power of telehealth and virtual care, but particularly in our women's and family health setting, where the care model just lacks so many of I think the fundamental types of providers to shepherd families through kind of healthy fertility journeys and healthy pregnancies. So then when we emerge from it, what really we've seen is, first of all, people do understand that mental health should be a core part of women's health. People are kind of thinking about how can telehealth and virtual care supplement some of the ways in which the bricks and mortar system has fallen down and not served women and families. And then I think in general, like as we're shifting now in this kind of fee-for-service model to value-based care, and as the consumer really matters, a lot of the kind of large players in health systems or health plans are starting to prioritize our category. And so there's a funny story where one of our big payer partners that we signed in 2020 during COVID, she was like, okay, so when you come to the state it's in, then you have to bring a bag of peanuts and you have to be eating peanuts in our meeting. And I was kind of like, why should I be doing that? And she's like, well, because the CEO of this, very large national health plan, he always thought digital health vendors were like peanut companies and they didn't matter. And so now he knows that they matter. And so I want you to be eating peanuts when you actually finally meet them. So anyways, I think the whole industry now has, does take all of digital health now a lot more seriously, and they have strategies. And what they're learning is that, I can't necessarily go build this myself. And so either I have to buy or partner, whereas I think pre-COVID, it was very much kind of build or buy, and there was no partner, which I think, for us, it's just really unlocked a ton of growth because we are on the partner track. So anyway, so it's and I think that the silver lining as well is that we're all talking about health equity. I think for us, in our businesses, health equity has always been core, but no one was really talking about it as much. And so COVID really did expose a lot of the racial disparities in care, and so now, genuinely, I can say, like, in these really big conversations we're having with payers that control tens of millions of lives, like there is initiatives now to actually do something about it. And we're talking, the door might close at some point, but there is a moment right now where people are listening and people are genuinely trying to solve. Not everyone, but some.
Certainly, I think everyone has associated Everly Health with COVID testing. I think, to DEENA's point, what's really important is that we had built a national infrastructure for at-home care delivery of testing and telehealth since 2015, and had been delivering that for millions of people before COVID hit, which put us in a unique position to respond. And it's something that in the early days, in those moments, we were not going to get involved at all. And then it became apparent that actually we may be in one of the best positions to help with testing across the country. And so there was a moment in early March, probably around this exact date a couple of years ago, where Time Magazine published an article that we were going to bring the first at-home COVID test to market, and I think it hit every single American that owns an iPhone watch or an iWatch's little pop-up. And so I realized at that moment this was going to be either an incredible moment for Everly Health to really go into our full mission of serving people in this time of need, or it was going to be something that failed spectacularly. We got together and worked 24/7 for probably a year. My team has not taken a break since March of 2020, and they have been, I think, solely focused on delivering care when people needed it the most. And it's truly been something. We were 60 people in March of 2020. We're now over 700. It has truly been something that, for me, has been inspiring to watch, and to be at the helm of leading this incredible group of people that have just risen to the occasion. That being said, I think a lot of people associate us with COVID testing because there's now a lot of businesses that have gotten into just the COVID testing space, whereas part of the reason why we have so many people now is that at the same time as COVID testing was needed, this entire evolution and normalization of home health was also being seeded and just took off. We know that now 80% of employers expect virtual care to be a standard for their employees. You're hearing that from Kate in a different way. That's what we offer as well in testing and treatment. And what we have seen is over 300% growth year over year for several years in women's health testing, STI testing, several of these categories that are essential to care, that once people have the experience and realize that it can be done differently, they never want to go back. And so that has been something where we actually had to change our strategy of being a consumer education and in the demand creation business of then actually being supply constrained and saying, oh my gosh, we are in a completely unlocked market. How can we still serve people in a high quality way? And that has shifted a lot of who I've hired, how I've built the team, how I've built our strategy, and fundamentally has put us in a position to be a business of tremendous scale. We now serve, tens of millions of people every year. We have 300 enterprise clients. Our consumer business is still a significant and vast majority of our business and growing, and that's almost no COVID. And I think that thinking about that model and taking that moment is something that I could not have done myself, and it just makes me incredibly proud to think about what our team has delivered on. And I think this is actually the moment to be in diagnostics. We're going to see tremendous R&D, innovation, home innovation around what can be done in the home. And so we're really viewing this as a new act for us and being able to be at this center point of helping commercialize all these amazing technologies that will come to market. So for me, it's something that I view as a once-in-a-lifetime leadership opportunity. It's one no one wishes we had to go through, but it's something that I'm incredibly proud that we were able to deliver on.
One of the true joys of getting to spend time with both of you and your companies is also the incredible people that you have hired, the executives you've brought around the table. Can you share a little bit more with the audience what the experience has been like for you in elevating your team and as your company has grown, realizing the types of folks you need around the table, inclusive leadership. Both of you have amazing chief medical officers, COOs that I've had the chance to spend time with. So if you could share a bit about them and a few lessons learned in terms of team building at this scale. Kate.
Sure. So I think this is where values become really, really important. And it's interesting because we refresh our values every few years. And, the Maven of 2015 is actually very, very different than the Maven of today. There's still some values that are core that stay the same, that revolve around our mission. But as you think about operating values, it is, the type of growth and scale that, we're in as well. I think, Julie and I are both kind of, commiserating and excited about the hyper-growth moments and what that's doing to our personal lives, but anyways, and so I think that for us, I have tremendous partners. It actually is. It's what makes the job fun. I feel like fun is like a really important component of working together in the trenches when you are, there's a million things going on. You're working 24/7. But for us, I think there's a few core things that we look for. Number one is just that love of learning. Digital health is still actually relatively new in the big scheme of things. And so there's lots of things that haven't been tested before. There's lots of things that you need to maybe unlearn if you've been working in the past in large companies or academia or whatnot, and then kind of relearn in a new way. So learning is really important. I think this ability to kind of 80-20 things. So it's not Facebook kind of popularized move fast and break things. I think you can't really do that in healthcare, but you certainly need to move fast because better care can't wait. And so ultimately, that ability to kind of say, okay, this isn't perfect, but we're gonna ship not Kara, but like a marketing deck or a business strategy. Like we're gonna ship it and then iterate, and that test and iterate mentality is really, really important. And then finally, we're technology companies at the end of the day, and so there is so much data that actually we have access to build our strategies. And so I think it's all of our execs, we're really data driven in how we approach problems. We follow the science. And so I think one of the things that has been really important, and when I interview execs, is do we have a shared set of not just kind of company values, but operating values? And when we do, I think that's really where it becomes fun. And I think also a healthcare company, everyone has a horse in the race to make healthcare better. They have had a tough pregnancy. They've had a really rough fertility journey or surrogacy journey or adoption journey. I mean, almost all of our execs truly have their own personal story as to why they're at Maven.
Yeah, I think team building, you hear it, it is true. It is probably the hardest part of founding because it requires constant evolution, constant scaling, adding new people to the mix, deciding how you're going to focus on the organizational design of what you're trying to achieve. And especially as solo founders, I think it can be really hard to figure out who can be those trusted partners for you. I mean, I've been so fortunate to have many great executives throughout the history of the company, but it is a constant process of spending time on who needs more support, who needs a different role. How do you make absolutely sure you have the right role, the right person in the right seat for the right moment? All four of those things are really hard to optimize across an entire company. And I think it is a focus first on corporate values, but then to Kate's point, it's a lot on operating style, operating values. How are two executives going to mesh? It is a relationship that has to be invested in. We've invested in significant amounts now of actually pre-onboarding, goal setting and coaching, and just making sure that I can minimize the number of turns or mistakes or not being transparent about what's expected in the role, and trying to get as many of these incredible executives on board as I can. My only goal right now at my stage is to hire people in their respective areas that are far better than me, and to hire the very best people that I can in each of those areas. And I've been fortunate. I just brought on a COO in October who very much has been that kind of a focus. And we have several executives that have been now in their roles for 3, 4, 5 years, and who have continued to just adapt and scale and just really kill it at every new phase. And so it's been a great combination of just building this team that then you get to look back and say, gosh, I'm so excited I get to work with these people on these hard problems. I mean, this is our lives. This is what we're building for our lives. And so we want to be spending our time working with people who want to solve these really hard problems with us.
Yeah, it was Laszlo Bock, our advisor, who's amazing. He has this great saying where, a person's personal growth rate has to be faster than the company's growth rate. And so I think, there are certain phases of the business that are good for certain people, but for the really, the executives or just the team members who have been able to kind of, be there through the years, it's just they are growing so fast, faster than the company. So I love that kind of mental model to look at it that way.
So on stage today, we not only have 3 women who are committed to healthcare and women's health, we have thousands of employees represented, billions of dollars raised, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, billions of dollars deployed, but we also have 6 kids among us. And I am definitely not going to ask the question, how do you do it all? Because I hate that question, and please don't ask me that question in the future. But I am going to ask how the experience, thank you, how the experience of being a mother has enhanced your leadership abilities and your ability to lead a company. Because I feel it has enhanced my ability to be an investor, and I have a thesis around investing in moms. I call it the startup superpower, not superheroes, superpower. So I'd love to hear from both of you about how motherhood has made you a better CEO.
Yes, DEENA, I love your quote that you invest in mothers. So I think if I were in VC, I would take the same approach. So I have 3 kids. One of them is right there, Theo. And then he has a sister, Esme, and a little brother, Charlie. And so I think they absolutely kind of counterintuitively, they actually chill me out. They make you realize what's important in life, and I think it's really mental health for founders is a thing. And I think for me, I mean, honestly, my kids, there is at the end of the day, there's a time where I put down my phone and I am just a mom, and then I pick it back up, and it's like I'm refreshed and I'm rejuvenated, and then I can go kind of back to work, back to the endless grind of emails and whatnot. But I also think in general, kids make you way more efficient. I'm very direct, and I think it's a really good thing because I don't have time to be indirect. I have like a million things to do. I think my team really appreciates that about me. There's no guessing what I'm thinking because it's and if there's anything hidden behind it, because if you're moving a million miles an hour so that, when you're in that time with your family, that work is not encroaching, then that means you just have to get a lot done. So I think, kids have made me much better. Before kids, I started Maven right before the kid journey. And I think, I was pulling long hours, but they were just not as efficient. Like you can, put in 15-hour days and maybe 10, 11, 12 of them are efficient. And so now it's, I put in fewer hours, but those hours are just packed with greater efficiency. And then I think it's just, there's a greater balance in general to this, to this life.
I have one son. His name is Crosby. I don't like to tell people the name because I don't want it to become popular, because I want it to be I like an unusual name. He's 2.5. And he was 6 months old when when quarantine began. I think for me, it has really helped me to become a more empathetic leader and manager, because I understand a lot of the pressures. I mean, I'll give you a great example, and I'm just going to be honest. We all rely on childcare. For women to do this job, our support structure is essential, and I think people don't talk about it enough. And we are very, very fortunate to be in the position to have the childcare support that we have. But yesterday was spring break, and neither my husband or I knew it, and our son didn't have any childcare, and it's South by Southwest, and we're trying to solve a last-minute problem because our nanny has a 103 fever, and I was able to bring my mom in to help, right? That is a great privilege. And so I want to just bring some light to that, because I think a lot of what we're seeing, and Kate can talk a lot about this in women in the workforce, especially during COVID and what's happened. I think that we assume that there's just kind of these magical structures that are supporting us behind the scenes, and I have it relatively easy. And so I think that perspective has been really, really game-changing for me as we think about how we build a company where I just shared with you, my team works really, really hard. And so how can we build an infrastructure that can support them in their work and in their life? And so that's a little bit of a flavor of just kind of some of my learnings that I've had over the last 2.5 years and the reality of my day-to-day, right? And just being able to lead a company at this scale and what that takes, and how I'm really fortunate to be where I am, and how can we help fill some of those gaps for other women in our companies and other families. I mean, men and too, it's so important that it's actually equal in those benefits so that we can deliver that too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you're in Texas and your family lives in Texas. So I learned, my mom, who's here, she lives an hour from New York. And a lot of people were like, why would you start a company in New York? Like, why wouldn't you just go to San Francisco? And it's like, well, because I'm going to have a family and I need my parents and I need my family around if I'm going to do this. And so I think also, that as we look at, mother entrepreneurs, it's really important. It's not just going to show up in San Francisco, because if you're going to make it all work, you kind of have to move to where your family is to be able to kind of juggle it all.
We hosted a small dinner last night around advancing women's and family health, and the theme was that it takes a village. And it really does, not only for us personally in our careers, but truly to advance the future of women's and family health. It takes payers, it takes providers, it takes founders, it takes investors, it takes clinicians, it takes nonprofits, policymakers, all of the above. And I think that lesson applies across the board and even in our personal lives. So I would add, in addition to empathy and ruthless prioritization, ain't nobody got time for wasting time. The other things that we've seen are also the ability to coach, to bring out the best skills in your team. Those are all things that we learn from being a mom. So don't give away my secret too much, but moms make the best founders. I want to end before we turn over to Q&A with a quick question for both of you, which is a question I'm sure you get asked all the time. I know you do, because I think I heard 5 or 10 people ask you just last night. But what is the number one piece of advice you would give to a founder starting a company in healthcare, in particular a woman founder today? Kate.
Well, I think we all converge around keep going, so I'm going to blow that one out. But no, I also I think really importantly, surrounding yourself with a network, not just of other female investors, but we had a great lawyer early on. We had a great, early doctors who were on our medical advisory board as we were just getting started. And so healthcare is a really complicated industry, and there's a lot of, expertise, I think, that would be really excited to coach and help in those early days to make sure you're getting on the right path, so that when the scale hits, you're ready for it.
I would agree. I think we all aligned. Number one for all three of us was keep going. Second piece of advice then is I think just understanding that there's so many ways successful companies are built. There's not one model. There's not one framework. There's many successful businesses that don't need venture capital, and really understanding how and why you're building this business, how the business needs to be built for you, and what kind of partners and capital structure that takes. And that is such a great way to align. So many founders, I think, go around with their hand out, hoping to get a little bit of money from venture capital, and they don't understand that the power dynamic is actually the opposite. Founders are who creates the returns in funding. Founders, that's it. Founders and companies and teams and ideas. But really, if it's early stage investing, it's the person and it's the idea. And so that dynamic, I would love to see changed into a more equal relationship when people are out fundraising. And I try to instill a little bit of that confidence and attitude when I speak to any kind of founder, because it can feel so one-sided, and to really create that mutual respect and relationship. And so that's probably another piece of advice I would give, is not to sell yourself short.
Absolutely. I often explain to my own family members in terms of what I do for a living who question, why are you working so hard? Like, why are you hustling so much? Aren't you just sitting there writing checks? It's absolutely not the way it works. You are, these women can attest that the best investors are hustling to get into the best deals. We have to show why they should choose us in very competitive situations like they all have been in. So I think founders who understand that dynamic can really bring that confidence from the early days, although it's not always easy. So we're going to turn to some questions from the audience. The first question is from Liza Rodewald, and she's asking, with your at-home and telehealth models, how have you designed working with your top-level leadership? And I think as a lot of employers are thinking about remote or returning to work, how do you all think about those challenges in the context of your own businesses? Who wants to take it first? Kate?
Sure. So we've been really intentional that we're an in-person culture. What that means, I think, in 2022 is that you're in person 3 days a week, which is fine and great. And actually, it's been really great for our parents to be able to have that flexibility. So, but we really want the in-person experience. So we have offices in New York, and then when we had 2 execs join us in San Francisco, part of it was great. We're going to open a San Francisco office so that we can all be in person. And so I think it's just the dynamism that you experience. I think growing and scaling a company. I think and the lost learning when you're not in person is tough. So we personally have decided to be in person.
We're still going through a decision-making phase for the whole company. Part of that is because we don't intend to lose any of the great people that we've hired over the last 2 years, and we've hired 83% of the company, hired or acquired since March of 2020, and 50% of people in the last year. That is a lot of learning. It's a challenge. It's also an opportunity, and I do think the connective tissue of the company is still coming together. Now, with our top-level leadership with C-suite, most are located in Austin. We're in person for our kind of weekly 2-hour management meeting and then lunch and dinner once a week. We get together, the whole C-suite, in Austin quarterly. And then typically people are in town at least once a month, and they're gathering in their respective other areas. That being said, being in Austin, I will tell you, we do not, in the current moment, have the luxury of bringing, for example, our product and engineering teams back to the office without significant resignation and turnover, because the reality of the talent market doesn't support that for where we are. And so, our goals are to be sure we are creating a great employer brand, creating a connective tissue around teams and people having those relationships, creating a culture that we can all be really proud of, but also likely having a portion of our workforce that is fully remote and will remain that way. And so I think probably towards the end of this year, we'll make some, real principles and goals around who and what a return to work will look like for people that want to do that, but we'll maintain flexibility. I do think for top-level leadership, it is very difficult to build an aligned culture without being in person and having that in-person time. But right now, what keeps me up at night is the fact that we have so many people that I just envision their day-to-day, they're really out on an island. They're on their Zoom calls, they love the company, they may love their team, but they don't have that connective tissue. And so we're rolling out also a series of in-person, like a US roadshow tour for me and a few other executives to try to go meet everyone, bring people together and gather them. And hopefully that'll be the start of something consistent for us. It's been stopped and started a few times with the various variants, but I think we're there and should be kicking that off in April. But we're trying to stay flexible and continue to just innovate around what we think our team needs.
So this question reminds me of one I often get asked, which is, are you still going to invest in women's health, or have you checked that box? Which I find particularly offensive because there's no box to check. It's a massive category with multiple indications within it that need to be addressed from a care delivery perspective, opportunities on the diagnostic side, opportunities on the therapeutic side, on the R&D side. At Lux, about 20% of our portfolio was either founded by or is currently being led by a woman, which is 10x better than the industry standard. The women-founded companies, in terms of median value, represents 7 times the median valuation of their peers in that category. So that's pretty remarkable. And we have a number of investments in and around women's health, including the two that you see up here, including A-Life, which is transforming IVF through advanced AI, including Aiden, which is developing personalized birth control to help predict the best hormonal birth control, a company called Game2, which is delaying menopause through developing ovarian longevity, and other companies that are not necessarily focused on women's health but are advancing women's health, like H1, which is connecting key opinion leaders and researchers with pharma to accelerate innovation, and companies like Science 37 and Human First, which are enabling decentralized research through telehealth and also through the integration of wearables. So there are many, many ways to address it, and it's not nearly enough, and we are definitely still excited about more. So in terms of what's next for women's health, I'm gonna take notes here, so you all tell me, what do you think is next in women's health?
Well, I hope that particularly closing a lot of these gaps in care, not just for, in the care model itself, but among populations. So, looking at our maternal mortality crisis in the U.S., I mean, that needs real innovation, real dollars, real focus. So I hope that, one of the biggest things we're going to see is closing some of those gaps. And so, as our chief medical officer talks about, you are 500% more likely to have a C-section than your mother, or than the generation before us. We have the highest rate of maternal death in the developed world, and so I would hope that what's next is that we are actually closing some of these gaps. And then I also think that one of the most exciting industries from a science standpoint is the fertility industry. I mean, it is amazing what genomics and a lot of those new frontiers that we're looking at in terms of personalized medicine. And so I think we're going to be able to see a lot more democratization around that as well. And so I'm constantly, we have a medical director, multiple medical directors who are reproductive endocrinologists, and I'm fascinated by what I'm learning from them every month of like what the latest innovation is in the space. So, and I think that greater kind of lens into women's reproductive health will also, help close some of the gaps.
I think one of my favorite anecdotes recently was my girlfriends joking on a text chain about how the first time their husbands used an at-home rapid COVID test, they all thought they were positive because the window would be flooded with the liquid until the positive line showed up. Every woman in America who's taken a pregnancy test knew exactly how that at-home COVID test worked. And I share that because we are at such a unique moment in making diagnostics affordable, accessible, and taking what has been such a like if you asked Americans, we did this research, what an at-home test was before the pandemic, it was a pregnancy test or a DNA test. And to get that pregnancy test to you over the last several decades, it took a woman scientist creating it and her advocating for over a decade after it was created to have doctors permit it at home because there was fear that women would be hysterical and would self-harm when they were able to find out about a pregnancy at home. This was in the 70s, so not that long ago. I share that because if you see the bridge to where we are now, there is so much opportunity, and there were billions of dollars poured into R&D around affordable, cheap diagnostics for hormones, for STIs, for diabetes, for cancer, all of which will be coming to market in the next 3 to 5 years that were probably more than a decade away prior to the pandemic. And so if there's any silver lining, I truly believe it is that we are on a almost technology explosion of what can be done affordably in the home around many different aspects of diagnostics that ultimately will end up serving women for a number of different condition areas. And so that really energizes me because one of my most galvanizing moments was reading this article about how the at-home pregnancy test was created and just being so incensed about it that I just needed to do something differently. And I feel like now the R&D is aligning with what we've developed commercially, and we can really bring those things together for consumers and for people in their homes. So I'm excited about it.
I love that. I often use the example actually of the development of the mRNA vaccine to point to why it's not just technology. technology is awesome. We invest in deep tech, great. But in healthcare, technology alone is not going to drive outcomes. We learned, despite absolutely record-breaking innovation and development that allows us all to be here in person now and help move past, hopefully, this pandemic. But without meeting patients where they were, without culturally competent care, without empathy and human-centered design, you're not going to get jobs in arms. And so I think that's really a component of leadership that you both bring to the table and that we look for in all of our founders. We have, Julia, do you want to say something? Yeah.
There's an important question that I want to ask you that someone has asked. And I appreciate this question. Someone has asked anonymously, as investors, how do we change our pipeline and search criteria to optimize for more female founders? It's such an important question and would love to hear how you've seen this done and how you do it yourself at Lux.
Yes. So, well, first of all, we need more people that look like us writing checks. And that's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's also in the benefit of the entire fund and the benefit of our economy. There is data that shows that women invest in more women-led companies, that women-led companies hire more diverse teams, and that all of the above contributes to better outcomes, economic outcomes, and long-term impact. And so that's the first thing we need to do. And also, I don't think there's a pipeline problem. So I am meeting every day and hearing from every day so many incredible founders who may not have started or even thought about starting companies 5 or 10 years ago, who are inspired by the examples of founders like you. Many of them still have a very hard time raising at the earliest days. So pipeline, not the problem. It's about the biases that exist still. They exist in every facet of our lives all the time. We face those constantly, but helping to ensure that there is diversity around the cap table, not just to make the investment, but throughout the course of company building, is really, really important. And one way that I've personally survived and hopefully thrived in this industry is through my squad. It can be really lonely. I think you all can agree as founders. And so having an incredibly supportive group of women investors, many of whom are also moms. I'm on this incredible group thread of VC moms, and we'll talk everything from negotiating intense term sheets to recommendations for baby monitors to childcare while traveling for conferences. I mean, that's what the world needs more of. I don't know if you all have anything to add because they're also active angels.
I think it was pretty amazing during our Series D. DEENA was like, okay, great. We have a little bit of room left. Like, I'm going to send you a bunch of female investors because we got to get more women on the cap table, which, and some of them came into the round, which was awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not just VCs. I think angel investing has been this sort of opaque black box to so many for so long, and it shouldn't be. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the job is once we sign the term sheet is opening up opportunities to amazing operators and individuals who can actually really roll up their sleeves and help, like both of you.
On the angel investing side, I write very tiny checks, but what I do is I take all of my cap table. I have an incredible group of VCs, and every time they're raising, they're getting the email. And so I'm really trying to help close the gap on deal flow into venture funds. Many of my venture funds are quite diverse in terms of founders, but they're generally male-led. And those referrals are taken seriously. I've personally helped diversify a lot of their founder base, and I think that that's another way. I mean, the three of us probably see every female-founded deal in the country. And so if you're looking for more deal flow or pipeline, get on our list. So
one of the things I admire about both of you as well that I try to embody myself is it's about getting a seat at the table, but it's also about pulling up a chair for someone else. And I think that's something that's really important as you kind of progress in your in your leadership. There's only so much you can do individually and only so much you want to do. You want to bring others along. And so I've seen both Julia and Kate do that with opportunities presented to them that they present to their leadership or to rising stars. And I do the same. And I think literally everyone in this room, woman, man, somewhere in between, you can do it as well. And so that's a quick and immediate way to help opening up doors. We are over time now. I could talk for hours with these two, but thank you so much for your amazing questions and attention. Thank you both so much for everything you do, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
here's to more of this. Thank you.